Single dad takes in a stranger, not knowing she was a millionaire's daughter. Before we begin today's story, make sure to subscribe below, comment where you're watching from, and leave a like. I love seeing how far these stories can reach. And if you love emotional love stories, fresh starts, and unforgettable endings, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It really helps it grow and motivates me to keep bringing you stories that touch the heart. The sky over Savannah suddenly darkened that autumn afternoon. Heavy clouds rolled down like curtains over the city, swallowing the golden light of the day's end. The rain came strong, violent, as if the sky wanted to wash away the world's pain. Mike Carter stepped out of the small garage where he'd worked for over 10 years. His hands were still dirty with grease, and his stained cap offered little protection from the downpour. Beside him, 6-year-old Ethan clutched his lunchbox tightly, shielded under his father's large coat. Their old pickup truck was waiting on the other side of the street, but something made them stop. There, curled up under the rusted cover of a bus stop, was a young woman. Soaked from head to toe, she was shivering from the cold and clutching a faded backpack tightly. Her blonde hair, now darkened by the rain, hung in messy strands over her shoulders. Her green eyes, despite her pale face, still carried a light, a quiet resilience. Mike tried to ignore her. It wasn't his problem. He knew how cruel the world could be to strangers, but then he felt the tug of Ethan's little hand. "Daddy, she's sad." Mike looked down at his son. The boy's eyes didn't lie. He always saw what adults pretended not to. "Let's go home, son," Mike said firmly, but his steps stopped again when he heard a sneeze from the bus stop. The woman coughed and curled in on herself, trying to shield her chest from the cold. No car stopped, no one even looked. Mike took a deep breath, feeling the conflict growing in his chest. That woman could be anything, an addict, a liar, a threat. But there was something about her, something in the way she clung to that backpack, like it held everything she had left in the world. He stepped closer slowly, with Ethan still clinging to his leg. "You waiting for someone?" he asked, trying to sound firm, but his tone came out gentler than he'd intended. She lifted her face slowly. There was dignity in her gaze, even, soaked and exposed. "No, just needed a dry spot for a few minutes. I'm already leaving." Her voice was soft, with a slight accent from someone who'd grown up far from there. But there were cracks in it too, cracks of someone who'd trusted too much and now just wanted to go unnoticed. Mike looked around. Savannah wasn't kind to people with nowhere to go. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" he pressed. She hesitated for a second, then shook her head, embarrassed. "I won't be any trouble. I just need one night. I'll be gone tomorrow." Ethan, curious, peeked out from behind his dad and looked at her. The boy's eyes lit up. "Are you cold?" Mommy used to say. A warm blanket and hot chocolate fixed everything. Mike closed his eyes for a moment. The mention of his late wife always broke him inside. "What's your name?" he asked at last, resigned. "Grace," she answered almost in a whisper. "Grace Witt." She stopped before saying her last name. Mike didn't ask more. He extended his hand. "Mike, this is Ethan. The house is simple, but there's a blanket and hot chocolate." She took his hand hesitantly, and in that brief, cold touch, Mike felt a strange shiver run through him. A warning, a sign, or just the beginning of something he could never have imagined. The walk to the house was silent. Grace clutched her backpack to her chest, like someone carrying a secret. Ethan, innocent and talkative, chatted about cartoons, tomato soup, and how comfy the couch was. When they arrived, Mike handed her a towel and clean clothes, a large t-shirt and sweatpants that no longer fit him. Grace thanked him with a shy smile and stepped into the bathroom with light, almost invisible steps. While she changed, Mike made a quick soup and stirred some chocolate powder into warm milk. He felt ridiculous, offering soup and hot chocolate to a soaking wet stranger, but there was something there, something in him that couldn't ignore the instinct to protect. When she came back, her hair still damp and wearing the loose clothes, she looked like a different person, younger, more fragile. And yet there was a strong kind of beauty in her, the kind that didn't depend on makeup or expensive clothes. "Thank you for not leaving me out there." Mike just nodded. Ethan sat between them with the steaming mug in his hands. That night, she slept on the couch. Mike lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sound of her breathing in the living room. And he thought, what is a woman like her doing here, alone, running from the world? He had no idea. But that rainy night in Savannah would end up changing everything. The early morning hours in Savannah dragged on slowly, and the light rain now slid down the window glass like lazy tears. From the bedroom, Mike watched in silence as Grace lay on the couch. The oversized t-shirt hung from her body like it didn't belong to her. But even there, barefoot, her damp hair falling over her face, there was a calm presence about her that unsettled him in a strange way. She slept hugging her backpack like she was afraid someone would take away the little she had left. The lamp cast a soft glow, and for a moment everything seemed at peace, but inside Mike was not at peace. He lay down beside Ethan, who was already sleeping deeply. The boy still held a cloth doll with the word "Mom" stitched on its little belly, one of the last gifts from his mother before she passed. Mike turned to the side, tried to close his eyes, but the image of Grace, alone and vulnerable, kept visiting him. "Who are you, Grace?" he murmured softly, not expecting an answer. In the living room, Grace jolted awake. She sat up slowly, looking around like someone relearning the world. For a second, she seemed to forget where she was. Then she touched the fabric of the couch gently, as if to confirm it was real. The warmth of the home, the light smell of cinnamon coming from the kitchen, the distant bark of a dog in the neighbor's yard, all so different from the night before. She got up without making a sound. She went to the kitchen and filled a glass with water. Her hands trembled slightly. The silence was comforting, but also threatening. She didn't know how long she would be there. She didn't know how long that truce with life would last. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. It was Mike, his hair messy, his cotton shirt wrinkled, and an unreadable expression on his face. "I couldn't sleep," he said, leaning against the wall. "Me neither," she replied, trying not to seem fragile. For a moment, neither of them said anything. They just stood there, sharing a silence that spoke louder than words. "Is there someone looking for you?" Mike asked, crossing his arms. His voice was firm but not aggressive. Grace hesitated. She looked at the glass in her hand, then at him. Maybe, but not out of love. Out of control. Mike nodded slowly. That said a lot, and at the same time said nothing. "And you? Do you always help strangers?" "No, actually, I try to avoid it, but—" He paused for a second and let out a tired half-smile. "There's something about you that made my son believe, and when he believes, I listen." Grace smiled for the first time since she arrived. It wasn't a toothy smile, but one of those quiet ones from someone who hadn't smiled in a long time. "He's got a big heart. Takes after his mom," Mike said, and immediately his face darkened with longing. Grace noticed. The pain was visible there, hanging in his eyes like a memory that never left. "She passed away?" she asked, almost in a whisper. Mike only nodded. Grace looked down. "I'm sorry." For a moment, time seemed to stop between them. Two souls marked by abandonment, by loss, by silence. And there, under that simple kitchen with a scent of the past, something began to grow. Mike stepped away from the wall and grabbed a blanket from the cabinet. "It's not much, but it helps keep warm." "Thank you." She took the blanket, her fingers brushing his for a moment, a light touch, almost accidental, but it sparked an unexpected shiver in them both. "Good night, Grace." "Good night, Mike." She went back to the couch. Mike, standing in the hallway, watched for a moment longer. He saw her adjust the blanket, turn to her side, and pull the backpack close to her chest, like a child clinging to a secret. And then it happened. She whispered something quietly. Already nearly asleep, "Thank you for not treating me like someone broken." Mike felt the ground shift slightly under his feet. That wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, something he didn't yet know how to name. But that stirred everything inside him. He went back to the bedroom, lay down beside Ethan and closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he fell asleep without a weight on his chest. But deep down, something still stirred inside him. Who was this woman, really? And why, even trying not to care? Was he already starting to care? Morning arrived quietly in Savannah. The rain from the night before had given way to a grey sky, and a damp air still filled with silence. The modest Carter house smelled of fresh brewed coffee and bread warming in the oven. It was a simple smell, but one that brought a sense of home, a feeling Grace hadn't experienced in a long time. She was already up in the kitchen before Mike woke up. She wore the same oversized t-shirt from the night before, but her blonde hair was tied up in a loose bun at the top of her head, revealing the delicate shape of her face. Her bare feet moved lightly across the cold wooden floor. She stood watching the small stove intently, as if the act of making coffee was a sacred ritual. On the other side of the house, Mike was stretching, still half asleep. He smelled the coffee before his eyes were fully open. He got up slowly, hearing the soft clink of dishes being set on the table. When he reached the kitchen, he paused in the doorway, observing. Grace had her back to him, putting sugar into a chipped white mug. The shirt slipped slightly off one shoulder, and something about her posture blended fragility and strength. Next to her, Ethan was focused on drawing on a sheet of paper with colored pencils scattered across the table. Mike cleared his throat gently. Grace turned around, a little surprised, but with a faint smile on her face. "Good morning," she said, her voice still hoarse from sleep. "You're up early," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "And you're making coffee? It's the least I could do. You gave me shelter, and more than that." She paused for a moment, looking at Ethan, who was now showing her a colorful drawing of a robot holding a flower. "Look, Daddy," Ethan said excitedly. "She said my drawing looks real." Mike smiled as he walked over. "He spends hours drawing. It calms him." Grace nodded. "He has a big imagination and a huge heart." "Takes after his mom," Mike replied, and silence settled in for a second. Grace noticed but didn't try to fill the space. Instead, she poured coffee into 2 mugs and offered one to him. Mike accepted, and their fingers brushed for a brief moment. It was quick, but enough for them both to feel the warmth that came with that touch. "If you'd like, I can help with the laundry. I saw a full basket in the living room," Grace said, trying to sound casual. Mike hesitated. He wasn't used to sharing the intimacy of his home with anyone, but there was something about her. A calmness, a gentleness, as if she knew exactly where to step without intruding. "It's in the little room in the back. Machine's kind of noisy, but it works." Grace gave a small nod and headed toward the room. Minutes later, she was sitting on the floor, folding small t-shirts, colorful socks, and grease-stained pants. Beside her, Ethan showed more drawings and told stories as if they were old friends. Mike, watching from the hallway, felt something tighten in his chest, a knot made of memory and surprise. Because, for a moment, the room felt whole again, alive. And he realized something he didn't want to admit. He liked having her there. Grace caught him looking and smiled. A quiet smile, but genuine. One of those smiles you don't rehearse. It just shows up when your soul relaxes. "You should smile more," she said softly. Mike raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Why?" "Because it looks good on you." He looked away, not knowing what to say. That night after dinner, the 3 of them sat on the couch. Ethan fell asleep with his head on Grace's lap. Mike watched them in silence, feeling his heart beat faster. Grace gently ran her hand through the boys' hair. Then she looked at Mike. Her eyes didn't ask for anything. They simply expressed gratitude. "Thank you for today," she said quietly. "You're the one who did everything," he replied. "Even so, thank you for letting me stay." Mike wanted to respond, to say that she was changing everything, that the house felt lighter, that Ethan's laughter had started to echo through the walls again. But all he managed to say was, "Good night, Grace." "Good night, Mike." When she got up and walked over to the couch to sleep, Mike stood still, watching. She adjusted the blanket and lay down, still with a faint smile on her face. But when she thought he had already left the room, she murmured softly, almost like a prayer, "I wish this would last." Mike heard it, and in that moment he felt something shift inside him. Maybe it was too soon, maybe it was complicated, but maybe she wasn't alone in that wish, and in that comfortable silence, where 3 wounded lives had come together, something was being born that was stronger than words. Something that didn't have a name yet, but was already being missed. The afternoon. Sun bathed the streets of Savannah in a warm, gentle light. It was Saturday, and Mike had decided to take Ethan and Grace to the downtown market, where fresh fruit, handmade crafts, and the smell of roasted corn created a cozy, familiar atmosphere. Grace walked beside them in a light blue cotton dress, a small bag hanging from her shoulder. Her loose hair swayed with the breeze, and her green eyes seemed finally at ease, even if only for moments. Ethan ran ahead, happy, holding a red balloon he had gotten from a smiling vendor. Mike watched Grace in silence. She laughed at Ethan's silly jokes, bent down to help him pick apples, and gently squeezed Mike's arm when the sun got too bright. It was natural, as if she had always belonged there, as if that little outing was just another ordinary family day. But everything fell apart in a second. A shiny black car slowly rolled down the cobblestone street. It was an imported sedan with dark-tinted windows and Atlanta plates. Grace froze instantly. Her steps stopped, the color drained from her face, and her purse slipped off her shoulder. "Grace?" Mike asked, confused, touching her arm. She didn't answer. She just stared at the car as if she were looking at a ghost. The car didn't stop. It kept going, as if it hadn't noticed anything, but the damage was already done. Ethan came running back, holding the balloon, now fluttering in the wind. "Are you okay?" he asked, looking at Grace. She blinked several times, trying to regain control. She forced a smile, but her eyes were wet. "Yes, just the sun made me dizzy. That's all." Mike didn't believe it, but he didn't push. Not there, in front of his son. When they got back home, Ethan went straight to the backyard to play with a toy truck. Mike closed the kitchen door and leaned against the counter, staring at Grace with an expression she hadn't seen before. A look of doubt, of suspicion, of restrained pain. "Now you can tell me what that was," he said, his voice low but firm. Grace sat at the table holding an empty mug too tightly. "It was just a scare. Don't lie to me. Not after everything." She took a deep breath, a long one. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry, not yet. "You're right. I just lied, or rather, I hid the truth." Mike crossed his arms. His heart was pounding, but he didn't know if it was from anger or fear of what he was about to hear. "My full name is Grace Whitmore. I'm the daughter of Thomas Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Global Holdings. I grew up in Atlanta in a mansion that looks more like a luxury hotel, and I ran away." She said those last words barely above a whisper. "Ran away? Ran from what?" Mike asked, unable to hide his surprise. Grace stared into the bottom of the mug, as if answers might be there. "From an arranged marriage. From a life where everything was about control, appearances, status. My father wanted me to marry the son of a business partner, someone who treated me like a possession. I said no. He said I had to obey, so I left. No money, no cards, no security, just my backpack and a hidden ID. Silence filled the kitchen like a thick fog. Mike looked at her, trying to process every word. "You're a billionaire?" he asked in a tone that was hard to read. "I'm heir to a fortune, yes, but I have no access to it, and I don't want it. Everything I found here, your house, your son, you, it's more real than anything I lived in that world." Mike stepped back. He ran a hand through his hair, then over his chest. "And you thought hiding that was what? Safety? A sign of trust?" Grace stood up. The tears were finally falling, but she didn't try to stop them. "I thought that if I told you who I was, you'd treat me like everyone else. With fear, with interest, with suspicion. I just wanted to be seen, not as someone's daughter, but as a woman, as a person." She stepped closer. Her trembling hands reached for his. "Mike, with you I felt seen for the first time, not as Grace Whitmore, just Grace." Mike looked into her eyes, and he saw more than fear. He saw pain. He saw loneliness. He saw truth. But the weight of her confession still pulsed in the air. "I need to think," he said, slowly pulling his hands away from hers. Grace nodded silently. The tears didn't stop. Mike walked out the back door and headed to the old workshop, where he locked himself in. Inside, he leaned against the tool cabinet and closed his eyes. His mind was spinning. So was his heart. He didn't know what bothered him more, the fact that she had hidden the truth, or the fact that even so, he still wanted to run back and hold her. The sky was starting to darken over Savannah when Grace folded for the last time the blanket she'd used on the couch during those nights of refuge. The smell of the house, a mix of coffee, old wood, and the innocent joy of Ethan, would stay with her for a long time. But she knew she couldn't stay any longer. Mike had spent the entire day in silence, locked in the workshop, without even meeting her eyes. There hadn't been a fight. There hadn't been yelling. But the silence screamed a time. He walked past her as if trying to protect himself from something he didn't want to feel. That night, with her heart heavy, Grace wrote a note. The words trembled under the pen, but she tried to be firm. She folded the paper carefully and left it on the kitchen table next to the chipped white mug, the same one she used every day. Outside, the wind was already blowing strong, and the air seemed to carry the sadness lingering within those walls. Grace walked slowly to the bus station, clutching her backpack to her chest. The streets felt colder than ever, and her footsteps echoed like a farewell with every corner she turned. Inside the house, Ethan realized she wasn't coming back. "Dad?" he called from the top of the stairs, his eyes sleepy. "Where did Grace go?" Mike was sitting at the table, looking at the note. His grease-stained fingers held the paper like it was too fragile to read and too painful to ignore. "She had to go," he answered without looking at his son. Ethan came down slowly and stopped in front of him. He was barefoot, wearing wrinkled pajamas and holding his cloth doll tightly to his chest. "But she liked us, and you liked her." Mike took a deep breath. His son's voice felt like it pierced the walls he was trying to build around himself. "Sometimes liking someone isn't enough." Ethan frowned, confused. "You're letting her leave just because she's rich?" The question hit like a punch. Mike lifted his eyes and met his son's, small but full of truth. In that instant, he realized what he was doing. He was repeating the same pattern of fear that kept him from living, from loving. Without thinking, he stood up and grabbed the car keys. "Stay with Grandma, okay? I'll be right back." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. Mike rushed out, the pickup truck's engine roaring through the Savannah night. The bus station was simple, with cold metal benches and flickering fluorescent lights. Grace was sitting in the corner, her eyes red, hair pulled back in a hurry, and her body curled up. She held the ticket in her hand, but stared at nothing. She was there physically, but her soul seemed suspended. Then she heard hurried footsteps and heavy breathing. "Grace!" She lifted her head, her eyes widened. Mike was crossing the terminal, breathless, like the world was falling apart, and she was the only thing that still made sense. "You came?" she asked in disbelief. He stopped in front of her, eyes full, chest heaving. "I'm an idiot," he said right away. "I was scared of not being enough, of having nothing to offer you." Grace lowered her eyes, but he knelt in front of her, making her heart race. "But with you, everything here makes sense. The house, the coffee, Ethan's laughter, you filled every corner of what was empty inside me." She tried to hold back the tears, but couldn't, and before she could say anything, he leaned in and kissed her. It was a deep kiss, but full of care, as if time had stopped, as if all the silences, all the restrained touches, all the avoided glances had finally found their voice. When they pulled apart, Mike held her face in his hands, still stained with dry oil. "Stay. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because you're what was missing here." Grace smiled through her tears. "I never wanted to leave. I just thought you deserved someone simpler." Mike chuckled softly. "You're the realest thing that's ever happened to me." She let go of the ticket, and the paper slipped to the floor. That night, they returned home together under the starry sky that had finally opened after days of gray. Ethan was asleep, and in the hearts of those two adults, there was now a quiet certainty. Their love was born from truth, from choice, and from the impossible, that by some miracle had become real. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the slats of the blinds as if announcing a new beginning. The rain had finally stopped completely, and Savannah seemed to breathe in relief under the clear sky and a mild breeze rustling through the trees. Grace woke to the familiar smell of coffee and toasted bread coming from the kitchen. The sound of Ethan's laughter filled the space, followed by Mike's raspy, sleepy voice saying, "Take it easy with that milk, champ. You're gonna spill it again any second now." She smiled to herself before getting up, feeling her heart light, in a way she hadn't felt in years. When she came downstairs, she found the two of them at the table. Ethan wore a yellow shirt stained with paint and had messy hair. Mike, wearing an apron, was trying to keep some order in the kitchen, but there was more chaos than organization. "Good morning," Grace said sweetly. "Good morning, sofa princess," Mike joked, wiping his hands on a towel. Ethan ran to her and hugged her waist. "You stayed!" Grace knelt down, kissed his forehead, and replied, "Staying was the best choice I ever made." That afternoon, after lunch, Mike took her to the workshop behind the house. It was a large space, but worn down by time. The walls were peeling, the tools were old, and a faded sign above read, "Carter Auto Repair." "It's kinda beat up, I know," he said, opening the metal door with slight embarrassment, "but it still has soul." Grace walked between dust-covered cars and piled-up parts. She ran her hand over a hood and smiled. "Let's bring that soul back." Mike glanced at her sideways. "You know mechanics now?" "No, but I understand people, and you need someone who believes in this as much as you do." In the days that followed, the two of them dove into the project together. They painted the walls, reorganized shelves, and cleaned every corner with determination. Grace learned to identify parts through Mike's hands, as he explained everything with patience and pride. She made a lot of mistakes at first, got grease on her face, dropped bolts, but she laughed at herself so easily that the whole space seemed to come to life. Ethan helped when he could, handing them tools, drawing signs, and saying that one day he would also be the boss of the shop. During a break, Mike showed up with 2 glasses of iced tea and found Grace sitting on the floor, sweaty, her face stained with black smudges and a makeshift scarf tied around her hair. "You're never gonna be the same after this," he said, handing her the glass. "Greece is part of growth," she replied, smiling. "You should see yourself right now like a mix of debutante and mechanic." Grace burst out laughing, and Mike watched her longer than he should have. Days turned into weeks. The shop gained color, and with it, so did Mike's heart. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat in the bed of the pickup truck parked in front of the house. Ethan was asleep, and the sky was clear, full of stars. The smell of oil mixed with the scent of wildflowers nearby, and the world felt too quiet for everything happening inside them. Mike rested his arms on his knees and spoke in a low voice. "You know, when everything fell apart, I thought it was the end, like life had taken away everything good I had. But then you showed up, out of nowhere, and messed everything up, my schedule, my head, my soul." Grace turned her face toward him slowly. Mike stared at the sky for a moment, then looked at her. "I never imagined home would be you." She didn't answer with words. She just leaned her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. And in that gesture, as simple as it was eternal, there was more truth than in 1,000 promises. The breeze blew gently, as if it respected that moment. But across town, a black car was leaving a luxury hotel with a clear destination, and with it, a powerful name, a shadow from the past, and a plan that could put everything at risk. The next morning, Savannah awoke to its usual calm routine. The sound of bicycles rolling along the sidewalks, the bells of the bakery chiming, and the distant sound of Ethan playing in the yard with a wooden toy car. Grace was in the shop, cleaning paintbrushes with paint-stained hands and a smile on her face. The restoration of the place was going strong, and the days, though simple, had become full. She had no idea that peace was about to collapse. At 10:32 a.m., a shiny black car pulled into the gravel driveway of the property. A driver in a suit stepped out first, opened the back door, and then he appeared. Thomas Whitmore, elegant, imposing, in a light grey tailored suit and cold eyes that seemed to size up everything around him with disdain. His polished shoes stepped onto the dirt like he was avoiding getting dirty. He slowly removed his sunglasses and looked. At the front of the house, as if surveying a battlefield, Grace heard the sound of the car door slamming and stepped out of the workshop, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw him, she stopped breathing for a second. "Dad?" Thomas stepped forward, his expression full of disappointment and superiority. "So this is where you've been hiding, in a filthy garage, smelling like gasoline, surrounded by this." Mike, who had caught the sharp tone, came around from the side of the house, still wearing his rubber gloves. "Who are you?" he asked, looking the unfamiliar visitor up and down. Thomas stared at him as if he were looking at a grotesque mistake. "Thomas Whitmore, father of the woman you clearly manipulated." Grace stepped closer, eyes wide. "Don't talk to him like that. You ran away, Grace. You abandoned everything. Business, commitments, a name. And for what? To live like a mechanic's wife?" Mike swallowed hard but didn't respond. The man's presence seemed to suck the air out of the place. "I didn't run away from you," Grace replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I ran away from everything that was suffocating me, and here I can finally breathe. Breathing doesn't pay bills, doesn't protect you. This man is taking advantage of you, Grace. It's obvious." At that moment, neighbors began to gather near the entrance of the shop. Curious onlookers, former customers, people from the area. News traveled fast in Savannah. Mike looked at Grace, and something inside him seemed to break. He took a deep breath, pulled the house key from his pocket and held it out to her. "You don't owe anyone anything here, Grace, not even me. If you want to go, I understand. I won't hold you back." The crowd fell silent. Mike lowered his eyes for a moment, then added, "But if you stay, let it be because you love me, not because you're running from something." The silence that followed felt eternal. Grace looked at the key in his hand, at her father's clenched jaw, and at Mike, eyes glistening, trying to hide the pain of a possible goodbye. Then with steady steps she walked up to Mike. She slowly took the key, then placed it back in his hand, gently closing his fingers around it. "I'm not running, Mike. I'm choosing, and I choose you." The crowd let out a collective breath. A few older women smiled. Ethan, watching everything from a distance, ran up to them and hugged his not-quite-mom's leg. Thomas, pale with indignation, let out a cold laugh. "So that's it? You're throwing away your inheritance for a mechanic with an old pickup truck?" Grace looked him straight in the eye. "I'd rather have a roof filled with love than an empire built on control. Take my name off the will, but you're not taking away the woman I've become." Thomas stepped back. For the first time, he seemed to have no answer. He turned, got into the car, and drove away without saying another word. Mike was still frozen, breathing heavily. Grace turned to him and said, "Now you understand why it was so hard to trust." He nodded slowly, touching her face with the tips of his fingers, stained with paint and grease. "Now I understand, and I love you even more for it." She smiled with eyes full of tears. "Then you better get used to it, because I'm going to keep messing up your shirts." The crowd clapped softly and began to disperse. Savannah had seen many stories, but this one, no one would forget any time. Soon, but while love blossomed in broad daylight, no one saw what was forming in the shadows, because Mr. Whitmore, as he entered the car, called someone and said, "If she wants to live like an ordinary citizen, then let her learn how the real world works. Shut it all down." That night in Savannah arrived heavy with warmth and a different kind of silence. The sky was clear, but the city felt like it was holding its breath. Around 9 o'clock, the power suddenly went out. The lights went off completely, and everything was swallowed by darkness. The neighboring houses went dark too, and soon voices of surprise, candles being lit, and children's laughter broke through the blackout. At the Carter house, Mike searched for a flashlight while Ethan laughed excitedly at the situation. "Dad, the lights went out. Are we going to eat dinner in the dark like in the movies?" Grace lit 2 candles in the center of the kitchen table and arranged what was on the stove: rice, vegetables, and roasted chicken. Simple, but made by 6 hands and filled with love. "If this is a movie, then I want a happy ending," she said with a smile as she set the plates on the table. The 3 of them sat down together, lit only by the flickering candlelight. Shadows danced on the walls as if they were following the harmony between them. The outside world felt far too distant to touch that moment. Ethan, with his mouth full of rice, looked at them with the kind of innocence only children have. "Ah, you guys gonna get married?" Grace coughed lightly, caught off guard. Mike laughed, nervous. "Where'd you get that idea, buddy?" "Well," Ethan answered, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You love her, she loves you, and you look at each other, like in the movies Mom used to like." The silence that followed was sweet, full of meanings that words couldn't quite reach. Grace looked at Mike. He was looking back with that shy, slightly guarded look, but there was something different in his eyes, something decided, calm, full of certainty. He stood up without saying a word, walked to the small counter in the shop at the back of the house, and returned with something hidden in his hands. He sat back down, took a deep breath, and opened his palm. There, between his calloused, grease-stained fingers, was a makeshift ring. It was made from copper wire, shaped by hand, with a small bend that resembled a heart. Rough to some, perfect to her. "I don't have diamonds, Grace," he said, his voice low but steady. "I don't have a big last name, no inheritance. What I have are working hands, a son who loves you, and a heart that, even scared, knows it found a home in you." She lost her breath for a moment. Her eyes filled with tears before he even finished. Mike took her hand gently and added, "Will you accept this love, even without luxury, even without guarantees? Because I just know I don't want to wake up one more day without seeing you beside me." Grace was crying but smiling. The emotion welled up in her chest like a wave about to spill over. "I do, 1,000 times I do." Mike placed the ring on her finger, and Ethan clapped his hands, laughing. "Now we're a real family," the boy shouted, jumping around the table. Grace stood up, cupped Mike's face in her hands, and kissed him. A slow, heartfelt kiss, as if sealing everything they had lived and everything they were yet to face. Outside, the city's lights were starting to come back on in some areas. But inside that house, by the light of 2 candles and 3 united hearts, something was shining far brighter than any power grid ever could. However, the peace of that moment wouldn't last forever. On the other side of town, in a quiet office, a document was discreetly signed, and that paper, sealed with the Whitmore name, carried a blow that would test everything they had built together. Spring arrived in Savannah like a breath of fresh air, longer days, blooming trees, and a gentle warmth that seemed to bring color back to the city and to everyone's life. But especially to the lives of Grace and Mike, who now walked side by side, not just as a couple, but as partners in a project that went beyond love. With the help of friends from the town and a discreet investment from a part of the inheritance Grace still had access to, they began something that would change not only their lives, but also those of many young people forgotten by luck. The old shed that once housed the worn-out shop went through a new transformation. That's where Hope Garage was born. The sign was painted by Ethan with crooked letters, but filled with pride. Beneath the name, a phrase suggested by Grace: "Learning is fixing the future." The space now served as a free training center for local youth. On Saturdays, Mike taught basic mechanics with patience and humor. Grace ran the administrative side and made a point to listen to each story. From every teen who arrived, many came from broken homes, neglected schools, invisible futures. "Do you really think I can be a real mechanic?" asked a skinny boy with nervous eyes, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. Mike placed a hand on his shoulder and replied, "I don't just think it. I'm here to prove you already are." Grace watched these interactions with a sparkle in her eyes. That was the man she loved. That was the future she had chosen. Over time, the townspeople began to see the couple as a symbol of something rare, a new beginning. Their love wasn't shown through grand gestures, but in shared silences, glances exchanged over coffee, or when they cleaned the shop floor together at the end of the day. One afternoon, after everyone had already gone, Mike's old radio, the Yee, one that only worked when it wanted to, started playing a soft 80s love song, the kind that talks about forever. Mike looked at Grace, who had her back turned, cleaning paintbrushes with her hands stained blue. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Carter?" Grace turned around, laughing. "Even without a ball gown?" "Especially without." She dropped the rag, walked over to him, and wrapped her arms around his neck. He held her by the waist, firm and gentle at the same time. They danced there on the shop's sidewalk, under the orange sunset, with the radio crackling and her hair blowing in the breeze. "Feels like the world stopped," she whispered. "Or maybe it just learned to turn at the right pace," he replied, lips close enough to touch hers. And they kissed, not like in the movies, with grand soundtracks or perfect camera angles, but like they were telling each other without words that everything, absolutely everything, had been worth it. For a moment, the past didn't hurt anymore. The future wasn't scary, and the present was all that mattered. But in the distance, a black car parked discreetly in front of a law office. Inside, a woman with dark blonde hair and a cold expression looked at a brown envelope. She opened it, read the documents, and murmured, "They have no idea what's coming." The day dawned bright and cool in Savannah, as if the sky itself knew this date was special. The garage was closed, and the Carters' backyard was filled with colorful balloons tied to trees, tables with simple blue and red striped cloths, homemade cupcakes, and a cake with frosting dripping down the sides. It was Ethan's birthday. The little boy was now turning 7. He ran barefoot through the grass, wearing an Avengers t-shirt and a crooked party hat, laughing with his school friends and the teens from Hope Garage, who had become his big brothers for the day. Grace watched the scene from the porch, holding a white envelope against her chest. She wore a light floral dress, and her hair was in a loose braid, with a few strands falling over her face. She was nervous. Her hands were sweating. Mike came up behind her, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked in a calm voice. She nodded, still not turning her face. "Today, he's getting the most important gift of his life." Mike hugged her gently. "So are you." Later, after the birthday song, with kids smeared in frosting and the yard full of laughter, Grace called Ethan over to the big tree where he liked to swing. She knelt down, looking into his eyes. "I have a gift for you, but it's different from the others. This one doesn't come with a ribbon, it comes with a choice." Ethan frowned, curious. She handed him the envelope. He carefully opened it and pulled out the document. When he read his full name written there, Ethan Carter Whitmore, his eyes lit up, but not because of anything fancy. It was her last name, joined with the one of the father he already carried in his heart. It was a symbol of something no one could ever take away. Belonging. "Does this mean you're really my mom now?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Grace held his face in her hands and replied, tears streaming down her cheeks, "You chose me as your mom from the very first day. When you shared your chocolate with me, when you held my hand at the market, when you taught me how to fold your dad's socks." She smiled through the tears. "And today, I choose you both as my home, not by chance, by love." Ethan threw himself into her arms, hugging her the way only a child can. Mike, just a few steps away, watched with tears in his eyes. Grace looked at him. The two locked eyes as if replaying every moment they had lived, from the first rain to that moment. Under the clear sky, the passion from the beginning was still there, but it had transformed. Now it was calm, it was rooted, it was life. Mike stepped forward, knelt beside them and said, "Now we're officially a family. But honestly, we already were a long time ago." Ethan hugged them both. The image of the three of them together, sitting under the tree, lit by the evening glow, made a few guests pause in silence and smile. There was no luxury, but there was truth. In the distance, someone took a picture, a click that would freeze that moment forever. But while the new family celebrated, an identical envelope to Grace's arrived at a district judge's desk. An appeal had been filed. Sender, Whitmore Holdings. What had been a story of love and rebuilding was about to be tested by forces that had no understanding of the power of a home. The late afternoon breeze gently swayed the leaves of the oak tree in the center of Savannah's city park. The sun, in its slow descent, painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, creating a perfect frame for the scene unfolding over the checkered blanket spread out on the grass. Grace sat cross-legged, her light linen dress fluttering gently around her. Beside her, Mike prepared sandwiches with a calmness earned only through years. His hair was a bit more gray, and his broader shoulders carried the steadiness of someone who had built an entire life with his own hands. Ethan, now 13, laughed while trying to teach their newly adopted dog to fetch a stick. His brown hair was darker now and his gaze more focused, but there was still that boyish lightness in him that loved deeply. "He's terrible at this," Mike said, laughing as the dog ran in the opposite direction. "He's stubborn. Takes after you," Grace replied with a teasing smile. "I'm stubborn for you," he answered, raising an eyebrow. From across the grass, Ethan shouted, "Hey! I heard that!" Grace looked at her husband and then at her son and felt her heart swell, not from some loud emotion, but from something deeper. That kind of peace that only comes when you've survived everything that could have gone wrong and stayed anyway. Across the park, a film crew was adjusting cameras and microphones. It was for a special segment on women who had broken patterns and redefined their own paths. Grace had been invited not because she was the daughter of a tycoon, but because she had rejected that destiny and, alongside her family, created a model of inclusion and social transformation. Seated in front of the camera, her voice soft and steady, she began, "Some people think I was saved by luck, by money, or by some romantic twist of fate." She paused and gave a small smile, like someone holding on to a precious secret. "But the truth is, I was saved by something simpler, more raw, more real." She took a deep breath. Memories flashed across her eyes like a movie. The bus stop, the borrowed couch, the smell of grease, the boy in pajamas holding a cloth doll. I was saved by simple, honest love under a leaky roof that smelled like burnt coffee. Love that doesn't ask for applause, that doesn't need a contract. Love that isn't a fairy tale, it's a daily choice. She looked straight into the camera. Her eyes didn't waver. To choose to stay, to choose to forgive, to choose to begin again, even when the world wants you to turn back. In the background, Mike and Ethan watched her without her noticing. Mike wrapped his arm around his son's shoulders and said, "She's our miracle." Ethan nodded, smiling. Proudly, the filming ended. Grace walked back over to the two of them and sat down between them. Mike took her hand. Ethan rested his head on her shoulder. The sun was finally touching the horizon, and then, as if the universe honored that moment, the world seemed to pause for just a second. No noise, no rush, just three hearts who chose every day to love, not for what they had, but for who they chose to be. They no longer had to prove anything to anyone. Their love had survived judgment, social distance, doubt, the absence of guarantees, and against all odds, love had won. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I'd really love to know how much it moved you. If you liked it, give the video a thumbs up, share it with someone who also believes in the power of true love, and subscribe to the channel to hear more stories like this one. And before you go, I've picked out another touching story that'll move your heart even more. You won't want to miss it.